The first time Evan Whitaker saw Claire Dawson, she was not asking for help. She was teaching his hotel what kindness should have looked like. Rain hammered against the glass walls of the Whitaker Grand like 1,000 impatient fingers, turning the Manhattan night outside into silver streaks and blurred headlights. Inside, the lobby glowed with warm marble, gold lamps, white orchids, and the quiet arrogance of a place built for people who never had to wonder where they would sleep. Evan stood near the private elevator in a charcoal overcoat, phone in hand, half listening as his attorney spoke about board votes, inheritance clauses, and his Uncle Graham's latest attempt to force a sale of Whitaker House. Evan's face gave nothing away. At 35, he had learned that billionaires were allowed many things, but not visible fear. Then a child's small voice cut through the polished silence. "Aunt Claire, are we in trouble?" Evan turned. Near the far seating area, a little girl in a yellow raincoat clutched a stuffed rabbit against her chest. Beside her stood a woman with damp blonde hair pinned poorly at the back of her neck, one hand resting protectively on the child's shoulder, the other gripping a worn tote bag. Her coat was thin, her boots were wet, and there was exhaustion in her face that no luxury lobby could soften. But her voice stayed steady. "No, Maddie. We are just waiting for the rain to calm down." A hotel manager in a dark suit stood in front of them, smiling the way people smiled when they wanted cruelty to look professional. "Miss, the lobby is for registered guests. You have been here almost an hour." Claire lifted her chin. The storm flooded the subway entrance. "My niece was scared. We bought hot chocolate from the cafe. That does not give you permission to use the lobby as a shelter." Maddie moved closer to Claire. Evan watched the child's fingers tighten around the rabbit. Something in his chest reacted before his mind could make it efficient. Claire noticed too. Her expression changed, not into shame, but into a calm so deliberate it looked practiced. "Please lower your voice," she said. "She is 7. The manager glanced around, embarrassed by the attention, then leaned in. "And you are making other guests uncomfortable." Claire looked past him at the marble columns, the orchids, the expensive people pretending not to watch. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, but it traveled. A child should never feel like she is standing somewhere she does not belong. Evan forgot the voice of his attorney in his ear. He forgot the clause in his father's will. He forgot, for one impossible second, that his entire family estate could be taken from him in less than 2 months. The manager opened his mouth to respond, but Evan crossed the lobby before he could speak. The shift was immediate. Staff straightened. Guests looked up. The manager went pale. "Mr. Whitaker," he said. Claire turned, and Evan saw the surprise in her eyes as she realized the man approaching was not just another guest. Evan did not look at her first. He looked at the manager. "Is there a reason my hotel is making a child afraid of the rain?" The manager swallowed. "Sir, I was only following policy." "Then the policy needs a better heart." The words were controlled, but the room heard them. Evan turned to Maddie and lowered his voice. "Did you get marshmallows in your hot chocolate?" Maddie blinked up at him, still uncertain. "Only 2. That is a serious failure of hospitality." Claire's expression softened despite herself. "You do not have to do that." Evan looked at her then. Her eyes were blue, tired, and fiercely guarded. Not impressed, not grateful, guarded. For some reason, that mattered. "I think I do," he said. He asked the cafe to send fresh hot chocolate, extra marshmallows, and warm towels. Then he ordered a car to take Claire and Maddie home when the storm cleared. Claire thanked him, but not in the way people usually thanked Evan Whitaker. There was no breathless awe, no sudden calculation. Only caution. "We can pay for the drinks," she said. "That is not necessary." "It is to me." He studied her for a moment. "What is your name?" "Claire Dawson. And this is Maddie." The child nodded once. Claire's hand moved lightly over Maddie's shoulder, a gesture so natural it made Evan think of houses with lights on. In the kitchen, shoes by the door, laughter in rooms that did not echo. Things Whitaker House had not known in years. His phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. His attorney's voice was urgent. "Evan, Graham has filed the petition. He is arguing that Whitaker House should be sold unless you can satisfy the family stability clause before your 36th birthday. You have 60 days. Evan looked across the lobby at Claire, who was now kneeling to wipe rain from Maddie's sleeve with the corner of her own scarf. "Define satisfy," Evan said. "A stable household, public commitment, credible family structure." Your father wrote it vaguely. Graham is using that against you. Evan's gaze shifted to the antique brass key hanging from his private key ring. The key to Whitaker House, the cold mansion his father had loved and his uncle wanted to sell. I may have found an answer, Evan said. He ended the call before his attorney could ask what that meant. Claire stood when he approached again, already wary. The car is too much, Mr. Whitaker. We will wait for the bus. It is Evan. That does not make the car less expensive. He almost smiled, but the urgency in his chest would not allow it. Miss Dawson, I need to ask you something unusual. Claire's eyes narrowed. That is rarely a comforting sentence from a rich man. I need a fiancé. The words landed between them with the force of thunder beyond the glass. Maddie looked up from her hot chocolate. Claire stared at him as if he had just spoken another language. Evan reached into his coat pocket and removed the old brass key, heavy, worn, and colder than it should have been. Not a real one, he said quickly. A temporary arrangement. 60 days. A contract. You and Maddie would live safely at Whitaker House, and I would help you secure whatever legal stability you need. Claire's face went still. You heard us being humiliated for shelter, and your first thought was to offer me a role in your life? My first thought, Evan said, looking at Maddie, then back at her, was that you understand home better than anyone in my family does. For a long moment, only the rain spoke. Then Claire looked at the key in his palm and whispered, A house like yours does not need me. Evan's voice dropped, honest before he could make it polished. That is exactly the problem. It has never needed anyone. And now I may lose it because no one believes it is a home. Claire did not take the key, but she did not walk away either. Claire Dawson did not sleep that night, not because the rain kept tapping against the windows of her apartment, but because Evan Whitaker's question kept standing in the room long after she had left his hotel. I need a fiancé. The words sounded impossible in the glow of the Whitaker Grand, surrounded by marble and orchids, and people who spoke softly because wealth had trained the world to listen. But in her apartment in Jersey City, with a leaking ceiling above the kitchen sink and Maddie asleep on the sofa under two mismatched blankets, the impossible began to look dangerously practical. Claire sat at the small table by the window, still wearing her damp sweater, staring at the eviction notice her landlord had taped to the door that morning. 7 days. That was all she had. 7 days before she and Maddie lost the last place that still had cereal in the cabinet, school drawings on the fridge, and the pink nightlight Maddie needed because darkness still made her whisper for her mother. Claire rubbed her thumb over the edge of the notice until the paper softened. Across the room, Maddie turned in her sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Mommy, she murmured. Claire's chest tightened. She crossed the room and knelt beside the sofa, smoothing the child's hair away from her forehead. It is Aunt Claire, sweetheart. I am right here. Maddie did not wake fully. Do not let them take me. Claire closed her eyes. There it was. The fear beneath every bedtime story, every school pickup, every small hand gripping hers too tightly in public places. Since Claire's sister had passed away the year before, temporary guardianship had become a word that lived like a storm cloud over their lives. A social worker had been kind but honest. Stable housing mattered. Income mattered. Routine mattered. Love mattered too, but love alone did not fill out forms or pay rent or stop the world from asking whether a young aunt with no permanent teaching job could give a child a permanent home. Claire kissed Maddie's forehead. No one is taking you from me. She said it like a vow. Then she returned to the table and looked at Evan Whitaker's business card, lying beside the eviction notice like two doors into two different kinds of trouble. At 8 the next morning, Claire walked into a law office in Midtown that looked nothing like the free legal aid clinic she had visited twice. The walls were pale stone, the chairs were soft leather, and the receptionist said her name as if she had been expected by important people. Evan was waiting in a conference room with his attorney, a silver-haired woman named Margaret Sloan, and the old brass key placed on the table between them. He stood when Claire entered. Not halfway. Fully. It was a small courtesy, but Claire noticed because people with power often forgot small courtesies were the easiest way to prove they still saw you. Miss Dawson, he said. Claire, she corrected. His eyes flicked to Maddie, who stood behind Claire in a yellow sweater, holding her rabbit under one arm and studying the room with suspicion. Evan softened his voice. Good morning, Maddie. Are there marshmallows here? Maddie asked. Margaret Sloan blinked. Evan looked toward the receptionist through the glass wall. There will be. Claire almost smiled, then stopped herself. She could not afford to be charmed. Charm was how expensive mistakes introduced themselves. Margaret opened a folder and turned it toward Claire. This is a temporary domestic partnership representation agreement. 60 days. Public engagement only. Separate bedrooms. Separate finances. No romantic obligations. No physical obligations. Miss Dawson and the child will reside at Whitaker House for the duration, primarily for continuity and public credibility. Claire's eyes moved across the pages. The language was careful, polished, and cold. The child has a name, she said. Margaret paused. Of course. Maddie. Evan looked at the attorney. Use her name in every document. Margaret nodded and made a note. Claire continued reading. Evan would provide housing, private transportation, legal support for Claire's guardianship petition, and a secured education fund for Maddie regardless of whether the agreement ended early. That last line made Claire look up. Regardless. Evan met her gaze. Maddie should not pay for adult arrangements. The answer was too correct, and somehow that made Claire angrier. And what do I pay for it? You attend family dinners, charity events, and 2 board functions. You live at Whitaker House. You allow the public to believe we are engaged. So, I become furniture in your inheritance dispute. No, a decoration then. Evan's jaw tightened. No, Claire tapped the contract. This paper says I stand beside you until your uncle loses the right to sell your house. It says you help me satisfy a clause my father wrote badly and my uncle is exploiting. And after 60 days? Margaret answered. A respectful separation can be announced if both parties choose. Claire heard the careful word. Choose. Rich people loved that word when someone else had no options. Maddie tugged Claire's sleeve. Aunt Claire, is the big house scary? Claire did not answer right away. Evan looked at the child. Sometimes. That honesty surprised them both. Maddie frowned. Why do you live there if it is scary? Evan looked at the brass key on the table. Because my father loved it, and I have not figured out how to love it without him. The room went quiet. Claire saw something then, not enough to trust him, but enough to understand the shape of his loneliness. It was not the same as hers. His had chandeliers. Hers had overdue bills. But loneliness, she had learned, could wear any kind of coat. She picked up the pen. I have conditions. Margaret straightened. Evan said, name them. Maddie is not to be used in photographs without my permission. No interviews with her. No one calls her Charity. No one calls me Lucky. And if at any point she feels unsafe or unwanted, we leave. Evan nodded once. Agreed. And one more thing. Claire looked directly at him. I will play your fiancé. I will not play grateful. For the first time since she had met him, Evan's expression changed into something almost like respect. I would not ask you to. Claire signed before courage could leave her. Her name looked small beneath the thick legal language, but she wrote it carefully, as if dignity could live inside ink. Evan slid the brass key across the table. It was heavier than she expected when she picked it up, warm from his hand and old enough to feel like it remembered every person who had ever carried it. Maddie leaned close. Is that our key? Claire stared at the metal in her palm. For now. Evan's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, and the warmth vanished from his face. The message was from Graham Whitaker. I know what you are doing. Bring your little arrangement to dinner tomorrow, and let us see if she can survive being family. Whitaker House did not rise from the end of the driveway like a home. It waited like a judgment. Claire saw it through the rain-streaked window of Evan's black sport utility vehicle, a vast stone mansion set behind iron gates and winter trees, its windows glowing pale gold against the gray afternoon. Maddie pressed her small face close to the glass, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Is that where a princess lives? She whispered. Claire looked at the long columns, the wide steps, the perfect hedges trimmed into obedience. Maybe, she said softly, or maybe where a princess gets lost. Evan, sitting across from them, heard it but did not answer. His eyes were on the house, and for the first time since Claire had met him, he looked younger than 35, not boyish, not soft, but caught somewhere between memory and duty. The brass key rested in Claire's coat pocket, heavy as a question. When the vehicle stopped, a housekeeper opened the front door before Evan reached the steps. She was a tall woman in her 60s with kind eyes and careful posture. Mr. Whitaker, she said, then looked at Claire and Maddie with surprise she tried to hide. Mrs. Bell, Evan said, this is Claire Dawson. And this is Maddie. Maddie lifted one hand in a shy wave. Mrs. Bell's face softened instantly. "Welcome to Whitaker House, Miss Maddie." Maddie looked at Claire, then whispered, "She used my name." Claire nodded, feeling something small loosen in her chest. Inside, the mansion smelled of lemon polish, old books, and silence. The foyer rose 2 stories high, with a chandelier like frozen rain and a staircase wide enough for a movie scene. Everything gleamed. Nothing looked touched. Claire stepped onto the marble floor and heard her own wet boots squeak. She winced. Evan noticed. "You do not have to be careful with the floor." Claire looked around. "This floor looks like it has never forgiven anyone." Mrs. Bell covered a smile with her hand. Evan almost reacted, then seemed to remember he was not used to smiling in that house. Maddie turned slowly in a circle, taking in portraits of stern Whitaker ancestors staring down from the walls. "Why is everyone mad?" she asked. Evan followed her gaze. "They were probably told to look important. They look tired." Claire looked at him. "Children are usually better at portraits than adults." Evan did not disagree. Mrs. Bell led them upstairs to a suite prepared for Claire and Maddie. It was larger than their entire apartment, with cream walls, a fireplace, 2 beds, and tall windows overlooking a garden asleep under winter rain. Maddie ran to the smaller bed and touched the folded blanket. "Can Rabbit sleep here?" Mrs. Bell said. "Rabbit may have any pillow he chooses." Maddie smiled for the first time that day, and Claire felt the ache of gratitude so sharply she had to look away. Evan stood in the doorway, watching the child examine the room. "If anything is wrong, tell Mrs. Bell." Claire turned toward him. "And if everything is wrong?" He met her eyes. "Then tell me." It should have sounded like a line from a contract. It did not. That evening, dinner was served in a formal dining room long enough to make 3 people feel like strangers across a border. Evan sat at the head of the table. Claire sat to his right. Maddie sat beside her, too small for the carved chair, swinging her feet above the rug. A silent staff member placed covered dishes in front of them. Maddie stared at the silverware. "Which fork eats macaroni?" Claire gave her a warning look, but Evan answered before she could. "The one closest to your hand." Maddie picked up the wrong fork. With great confidence. "This one likes macaroni." Evan looked at the plate of roasted chicken and vegetables. "There is no macaroni." Maddie's face fell. Claire opened her mouth to explain that Maddie was tired, that new places made her ask for familiar things, that grief had made her cling to small routines. But Evan was already turning toward Mrs. Bell. "Can the kitchen make macaroni?" Mrs. Bell's eyebrows lifted. "Of course, sir." Claire looked at him across the table, surprised despite herself. "You do not have to rearrange dinner." Evan's gaze stayed on Maddie. "It is dinner. It can survive being rearranged." The statement was so simple that Claire felt it touched something tender. In her world, rearranging anything meant risking everything. In his, even dinner obeyed. After the macaroni arrived, Maddie ate happily, and the dining room changed by 1 small degree. Not warm. Not yet. But less frozen. Later, while Evan took a call in the library, Claire explored the kitchen with Maddie. It was enormous, spotless, and completely unused except by staff. Copper pans hung in perfect rows. A bowl of green apples sat untouched on the island-like decoration. Maddie opened the refrigerator and frowned. "There are no pictures." "Refrigerators do not come with pictures," Claire said. "Ours did." Claire swallowed. Their refrigerator in Jersey City had been covered with Maddie's drawings, school reminders, and one fading photograph of Maddie's mother laughing at a picnic. "We can make some," Claire said. Mrs. Bell found paper and crayons within 10 minutes. By the time Evan walked into the kitchen, Maddie was taping a crooked drawing to the stainless steel refrigerator. It showed a giant gray house with yellow windows, a small girl, a rabbit, Claire with very long hair, and Evan drawn as a tall rectangle in a black coat. Evan stopped. "What is that?" Maddie looked nervous. "It is the house." But I gave it a smile. Claire watched him carefully. The old Evan, the hotel owner, the contract maker, might have ordered the drawing removed to protect the flawless kitchen. This Evan stood still for a long moment, then stepped closer. "I did not know houses could smile." Maddie nodded seriously. "They can if people are nice in them." Claire looked away before he could see her expression. The next morning, the kitchen smelled like butter, maple syrup, and a kind of morning Evan had never been allowed to keep. Claire had woken early, found pancake mix in a pantry large enough to hide in, and made breakfast because Maddie had whispered that rich houses probably did not know how. Evan entered in a dark suit, phone in hand, already halfway into business mode, then stopped when he saw flour on the counter, Maddie at the island in pajamas, Mrs. Bell laughing quietly, and Claire flipping a pancake that looked more like the state of Texas than a circle. "Your kitchen is too clean," Claire said without turning. It needed evidence. Evidence of what? That people live here. Evan looked around the room. Sunlight spilled through windows Claire had opened. Maddie's drawings still clung to the refrigerator. A vase of grocery store daisies sat on the island because Claire had found them wilting near the service entrance and refused to let them die unseen. The house felt different. Not repaired. Interrupted. As if someone had opened a door inside it and let in air. Evan's phone buzzed. "Graham again. Family dinner tonight. Bring the fiancée and the child. Brielle will be there." Evan's face hardened. Claire saw it. "That is your uncle?" He slipped the phone into his pocket. "Yes." "And Brielle?" A shadow crossed his expression. "Someone who believes she belongs here more than you do." Claire set the spatula down slowly. "Then I suppose tonight she can learn that belonging is not inherited." Evan looked at her, and for the first time, he wondered whether he had brought Claire Dawson into Whitaker House to save it, or whether the house had been waiting for her to walk in and expose everyone who wanted it kept cold. By dusk, Whitaker House had dressed itself for judgment. The dining room glowed beneath chandeliers, silver candlesticks reflected in polished mahogany, and white roses stood in crystal vases like witnesses trained to stay silent. Claire Dawson stood at the foot of the staircase in a navy dress Mrs. Bell had found in one of the guest closets. Simple enough not to feel like a costume, elegant enough to survive the eyes waiting below. Maddie stood beside her in a pale yellow cardigan, gripping Rabbit under one arm and Claire's hand with the other. "Do I have to meet the scary people?" Maddie whispered. Claire knelt, smoothing a loose curl away from the child's cheek. "You have to meet people who forgot how to be kind. That is different. Can we remind them?" Claire's throat tightened. "We can try." Evan appeared at the top of the hall in a black suit, stopping when he saw them. For a second, he forgot the text from Graham, the board pressure, the 60-day deadline, and the clause that made this dinner a test disguised as hospitality. Claire looked nothing like the women his family approved of. She had no diamonds beyond the temporary ring Margaret had insisted she wear, no practiced smile, no family crest hidden in her last name. But she stood with Maddie tucked close to her side, steady and real, and the house around her looked less like inheritance and more like something worth saving. "You both look ready," Evan said. Maddie frowned. "Ready for what?" He glanced toward the dining room, where voices floated through the open doors. "A very boring dinner." Claire gave him a look. "Do not lie to children. It is bad practice for fake fiancés." A small breath of amusement almost escaped him. Almost. Then Graham Whitaker's voice cut through the foyer. "There he is. Our family man." Evan's expression closed. Graham stood near the fireplace with a glass of water in hand, a tall man in his early 60s, silver-haired and smooth-faced, with the patient smile of someone who had learned to insult people without raising his voice. Beside him stood Brielle Ashford, Evan's former girlfriend, wrapped in emerald silk, blonde hair perfect, diamond earrings catching the firelight. She looked at Claire the way someone might look at a chair delivered to the wrong mansion. "Evan," Brielle said warmly, stepping forward. "You look tired." "You look expected," Evan replied. Her smile tightened. Graham turned to Claire. "And this must be Miss Dawson, the sudden fiancée." Claire held out her hand. "Claire is fine." Graham looked at her hand for half a second before taking it. "How democratic." Maddie leaned into Claire's side. Brielle lowered herself gracefully to the child's level, though nothing about her felt gentle. "And you must be Maddie. What a sweet little surprise." Maddie looked at Claire before answering. "I am not a surprise. I came in the car." Claire pressed her lips together. Evan looked away, but not before Claire saw the corner of his mouth move. Dinner began with polished cruelty dressed as conversation. Graham asked Claire where she had gone to college. She answered that she had attended a state university for 2 years before leaving to care for family. Brielle asked whether she found Whitaker House overwhelming. Claire said any house could be overwhelming if people inside it acted like furniture mattered more than breathing. An older cousin coughed into his napkin. Graham smiled. "You were a teacher, I hear." "Elementary school. Temporary work. Honest work." Brielle lifted her wine glass. How noble. Evan has always admired causes. Claire understood the word immediately. Cause. Not woman. Not fiancé. Cause. She felt the heat rise under her skin, but she kept her voice even. Children are not causes. Neither are people with less money. Graham leaned back, enjoying the tension. Strong opinions for someone entering a family she barely knows. Claire looked at Evan then, waiting. Not for rescue. For recognition. For one sentence that said he understood she was not an accessory placed beside him to satisfy a will. But Evan's eyes were on Graham, measuring the trap, calculating the cost of every word. He waited 1 second too long. Brielle used it. And Maddie, she said lightly, will she be part of the arrangement as well? I only ask because children can be difficult baggage when one is trying to restore public confidence. The fork slipped from Claire's hand and struck the plate with a clear, sharp sound. Maddie went still. The room froze around that one word. Baggage. Claire turned toward Brielle, her face calm in a way that made the air colder. Children are not baggage, she said. They are the reason grown people should become better. Brielle's smile vanished. Graham set down his glass. Evan finally spoke. Brielle, apologize. The words were controlled, dangerous beneath the surface, but they came after the wound had already found the child. Maddie's eyes filled, though she did not cry. Claire pushed back her chair. Maddie and I need some air. Evan stood. Claire. She looked at him then, and the disappointment in her eyes did what Graham never could. It made Evan feel small in his own house. You paid me to stand beside you, she said softly. You did not pay me to feel invisible. She took Maddie's hand and walked out before anyone could answer. In the hallway, Maddie whispered, Am I baggage? Claire stopped, knelt in front of her, and held both of her small hands. No, sweetheart. You are a person. People who cannot see that are the ones carrying something heavy. Behind them, Evan stood in the dining room doorway, hearing every word. Graham approached his shoulder with a faint smile. Careful, nephew. She is already teaching the child to think she belongs here. Evan looked down the hall at Claire holding Maddie beneath the cold portraits of his ancestors, and for the first time, he wondered if Graham was not afraid Claire would fail the family test, but that she would pass it in a way none of the Whitakers ever had. The house did not sleep after dinner. It pretended to. Whitaker House settled into its usual midnight posture, chandeliers dimmed, hallways polished into silence, portraits staring down from the walls as if emotion were something impolite guests had brought in on their shoes. But behind the door of the guest suite, Maddie Dawson woke with a cry so small it sounded more like a question than fear. Claire was out of bed before her eyes fully opened. The child sat upright beneath the cream blanket, rabbit clutched to her chest, cheeks wet, breath coming too fast. Aunt Claire, she whispered, am I going to have to leave if they do not like me? Claire's heart tightened so sharply she had to sit before her knees forgot what they were for. She gathered Maddie into her arms and held her close. No, sweetheart. You do not have to earn a place by making cruel people comfortable. Maddie pressed, her face against Claire's shoulder. The shiny lady said baggage. The shiny lady was wrong. But Mr. Evan did not say it fast. Claire closed her eyes. Children always notice the exact place where adults failed them. No, she said softly. He did not. In the hallway, Evan stood frozen with one hand raised near the door, the words striking him harder because he had not been meant to hear them. He had come to apologize to Claire, or at least to attempt the shape of an apology, but Maddie's voice stopped him outside the room like a lock. He had faced investors who wanted to strip assets, attorneys who spoke in threats, and Graham's lifelong talent for turning family into strategy. None of it had prepared him for a 7-year-old asking whether his silence meant she could be thrown away. Evan stepped back into the corridor. For a moment, he stood beneath the portrait of his grandfather, then his father, then himself in a framed magazine cover Graham had once insisted belonged in the house. 3 generations of Whitaker men watched him fail in expensive lighting. He turned toward the kitchen. Mrs. Bell was still awake, reading at the small staff table with a cup of tea. She looked up when Evan entered. Sir, how does one make hot chocolate? Mrs. Bell blinked. One heats milk. I assumed there were steps after that. Her face softened, not with mockery, but with the kind of hope that embarrassed him more than criticism would have. She rose and opened a cabinet. There are. 10 minutes later, Evan stood outside the guest suite holding a tray with 3 mugs of hot chocolate, a small bowl of marshmallows, and a folded napkin because Mrs. Bell had said presentation mattered to frightened children. He knocked gently. Claire opened the door in a robe, hair loose over one shoulder, guarded exhaustion in her eyes. Then she saw the tray. For the first time all evening, she looked uncertain. "What are you doing?" Evan glanced past her to Maddie, who was watching from the bed. "I am trying to repair a delay." Claire's expression did not soften, but she opened the door wider. Evan entered carefully, as if the room belonged to Maddie and he was asking permission. From every stuffed animal, he placed the tray on the small table near the fireplace. "Mrs. Bell supervised," he admitted. Maddie sniffed. "Did you put more than 2 marshmallows?" "I was told the legal limit is flexible." Maddie looked at Claire, asking without words. Claire nodded once. The child slid out of bed and approached the table. Evan sat on the floor outside the circle of lamplight. Not too close, not pretending he knew what to do. Maddie took a sip and watched him over the rim of the mug. "Do you have bad dreams?" she asked. Claire inhaled softly, ready to redirect, but Evan answered, "Yes." Maddie lowered the mug. "About monsters?" Evan looked toward the dark window where rain whispered against the glass. "About empty rooms." Claire's gaze moved to him. He did not look at her. "When I was young," he continued, "my mother left this house in the middle of winter. After that, my father decided Whitaker House would stay perfect. No crying in hallways. No messy breakfasts. No photographs on refrigerators. He believed order could keep pain from finding us." Maddie frowned. "Did it?" Evan's mouth tightened. "No." Claire's voice came quietly from beside the bed. "Maybe that is why this house forgot how to breathe." Evan looked at her then. The sentence entered the room softly, but it moved through him like a window opening after years of stale air. He wanted to defend his father. He wanted to say Thomas Whitaker had done his best with a grief too large for language. But looking at Maddie in borrowed pajamas, looking at Claire holding herself upright because no one else had been allowed to collapse, Evan understood that good intentions could still build cold rooms. "I should have spoken sooner," he said. Claire held his gaze. "Yes." No decoration. No forgiveness handed out to make him comfortable. Just truth. Evan nodded. "I am sorry, Maddie." Maddie looked down at her mug. "To me?" "Yes. To you. Because I am not baggage." His throat tightened. "Because you are not baggage. You are a child. And adults who forget that should be corrected immediately." Maddie considered this. Aunt Claire corrected them. She did. "You can practice." Claire looked away, but Evan saw her mouth tremble with the beginning of a smile. He accepted the sentence with full seriousness. "I will." After Maddie fell asleep again, Claire walked Evan to the hallway. The tray was empty except for one marshmallow Maddie had saved for Rabbit, who apparently did not like wet paws. Evan stood under the dim wall sconce, no longer looking like the man who owned hotels, but like someone unsure how to enter a room without damaging it. "Thank you for the hot chocolate," Claire said. "I am aware it does not fix dinner." No, it does not. But it mattered to her. Claire looked toward the closed door. That is usually where home starts. The word home stayed between them after she said it. Evan looked down the hall toward the formal rooms, the portraits, the silence that had ruled this house for most of his life. "This house has heard that word before," he said. "I do not think it ever believed it." Claire's expression softened despite herself. Houses believe what people repeat. For the next few days, Whitaker House changed in ways too small for Graham to challenge and too powerful for Evan to ignore. Maddie's drawings multiplied on the refrigerator. Claire opened curtains every morning. Mrs. Bell began leaving fresh flowers in the library because Claire said old grief needed living things nearby. Pancakes appeared twice. One batch burned beyond rescue, one nearly perfect. Evan began coming home earlier without admitting why. He found himself pausing outside the kitchen just to hear Maddie explaining spelling homework to Rabbit, or Claire humming while rinsing dishes, or Mrs. Bell laughing like the house had surprised her by remembering joy. One evening, Evan fell asleep in the library with an old photograph of his father in his hand. Claire found him there near midnight, tie loosened, shoulders finally lowered, the fire nearly out. She stood for a long moment, looking at the man behind the contract, then placed a blanket over him. Evan woke just enough to feel warmth settle over him and see Claire turning away. "Stay," he murmured, not fully awake. She stopped. "You are dreaming." His eyes opened, heavy and unguarded. "No," he whispered. "I think I am." "Home." Claire did not answer, because the word touched something she could not afford to want. On the mantel above them, Evan's phone lit up silently with a message from Margaret Sloan. Graham is requesting emergency access to all household compliance records, including the engagement agreement. I think he knows there is a contract. The message on Evan Whitaker's phone waited in the dark like a match near dry paper. He did not see it until morning, when sunlight had already entered the kitchen and Claire was cutting pancakes into small squares for Maddie. The child had drawn another picture for the refrigerator, this one showing Whitaker house with smoke curling from the chimney, flowers by the steps, and Evan standing beside Claire instead of alone. Mrs. Bell placed orange juice on the island. Evan stood in the doorway, phone in hand, reading Margaret Sloan's warning again and again. Graham is requesting emergency access to all household compliance records, including the engagement agreement. I think he knows there is a contract. The warmth in the kitchen thinned. Claire noticed first. She always noticed the weather inside a room before anyone else admitted it had changed. What happened? Evan slipped the phone into his pocket too late. Graham is trying to force a records review. Claire set down the knife. Records, meaning the contract. Maddie looked up from her plate. What contract? Claire and Evan both went still. It was such a small question, asked through a mouth sticky with maple syrup, and it landed harder than anything Graham had said at dinner. Claire forced a gentle smile. Grown-up paperwork, sweetheart. Maddie frowned, unconvinced. Is it about us leaving? Evan stepped forward before Claire could answer. No. The word came fast, too fast, full of a promise he had no legal right to make yet. Claire looked at him, but he did not look away from Maddie. You are safe here. Maddie studied him for a long moment, then returned to her pancakes. Claire did not. She followed Evan into the hall, lowering her voice as soon as they were beyond the kitchen. You cannot promise what the paper does not protect. Then I will change the paper. That is what men like you always think, she said, though her voice held more fear than anger. That if the right document exists, the heart will understand. Evan flinched. She had not meant to hurt him. That made it worse. Before he could answer, his phone rang. Margaret's voice was tight. Evan, the agreement has leaked. For a second, the hallway seemed to tilt. What do you mean leaked? A gossip site has published a scanned copy. Graham's people are already feeding statements to business press. They are framing it as fraud against the family trust. Evan closed his eyes. Claire and Maddie? Margaret paused, and that pause told him enough. Their names are in the article. Evan turned toward the kitchen just as Mrs. Bell appeared in the doorway, her face pale, a tablet in her hands. Claire took it from her slowly. The headline burned across the screen. Billionaire hired struggling woman and child to fake family for inheritance. Beneath it was a photograph taken through the Whitaker Grand Lobby window the night Evan met them. Claire holding Maddie under the gold light, both of them soaked from rain. The article called Claire desperate. It called Maddie a prop. It called Whitaker house the prize. Claire's face drained of color. They used her picture. Evan reached for the tablet. Claire, I will have this removed. She pulled it back. Removed from where? The internet. People's mouths. Maddie's school. Her voice cracked on the last word. From inside the kitchen, Maddie asked, Aunt Claire? Claire straightened instantly, like a curtain drawn before a storm could enter. Stay here, she whispered to Evan. Do not let her see your face like that. Then she went back in. Evan stood in the hall, feeling the old mansion close around him. For years, Graham had called him too sentimental about Whitaker House, too loyal to walls and family portraits. But this was not about walls anymore. Graham had dragged a child into public shame because a house stood in his way. Within an hour, black cars lined the front drive. Graham arrived first, followed by 2 board members, then Brielle Ashford in a cream coat, her expression arranged into sorrow polished enough for cameras. She stepped into the foyer while Evan was speaking with Margaret near the stairs. Evan, she said softly, I came as soon as I saw. How generous of the internet to inform you. Her smile tightened. This can still be managed. Graham is using the leak to push an emergency vote. He will argue that you created a fraudulent household to preserve control. But if you end this arrangement now and announce that you were misled by Claire, the board may give you time. Evan stared at her. Misled by Claire. She signed the agreement. So did I. You are a Whitaker. She is a liability. The words seemed to darken the foyer. Evan's voice dropped. Be careful. Brielle stepped closer, lowering her tone into something almost tender. Marry someone the board understands. Someone who fits this house. I can help protect you. Evan looked past her toward the kitchen, where Maddie's drawings covered the refrigerator, and Claire was trying to explain to a child why strangers were saying cruel things without using any words that would stay in her dreams. You still think this house needs someone who fits it, he said. That is why you never belonged here either. Brielle's face hardened, but before she could respond, Graham's voice cut through the foyer. Touching. Unfortunately, romance will not stop a board vote. He entered with a leather folder under one arm, confidence in every step. The family council meets this afternoon. I will recommend immediate sale authority for Whitaker House and separation of household assets from company oversight. Evan turned slowly. You leaked the contract. Graham smiled as if disappointed by the obviousness of the accusation. You created the contract. I merely allowed the world to see what kind of family you purchased. Evan took one step toward him, not with anger in his body, but with a restraint so sharp the room felt colder. You put a child's face in that story. Graham's smile faded slightly. The child was part of your arrangement. Behind them, a small sound came from the kitchen doorway. Maddie stood there with Rabbit in her arms, Claire just behind her, horror dawning too late to stop what had been heard. Maddie looked at Evan first, then at Claire. I am part of the deal. No one moved. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Evan felt the sentence tear through the house more deeply than any sale ever could. Graham closed his folder as if the damage proved his point. Maddie's eyes filled. Aunt Claire, did we come here because he bought us? Claire dropped to her knees, reaching for her, but Maddie stepped back, small and shaking. Evan looked at the brass key hanging near the hall table, the one that had opened the door but had not yet made anyone feel safe enough to stay. And as Maddie ran up the stairs crying, Evan understood that Graham had not only exposed the contract. He had made the house itself ask whether love inside it had ever been real. By afternoon, Whitaker House no longer felt like a mansion under threat. It felt like a courtroom where every hallway had already chosen a side. Maddie stayed upstairs with Mrs. Bell, curled in the window seat of the guest suite, Rabbit pressed to her chest, refusing pancakes, refusing hot chocolate, refusing even Claire's softest stories. Was I in the paper? She had asked once, her voice so small Claire nearly broke. Claire sat beside her and answered with the only truth that could still protect something. You are not a deal. You are not a story. You are Maddie Dawson, and you are loved. Maddie looked at the door. Buy him too. Claire had no answer ready. That silence hurt more than anything Graham had done. Downstairs, the family council gathered in the formal sitting room beneath oil portraits and winter light. Graham sat at the center of the long table with the leaked agreement in front of him, as if a child's tears were merely supporting documentation. Two board representatives spoke in low voices near the fireplace. Brielle stood beside the window, dressed in pale blue, her face arranged into sympathy for Evan and distance from Claire. Margaret Sloane sat at one end with her briefcase open, tense but composed. Evan stood near the mantel, one hand resting on the cold marble, looking toward the staircase every few seconds. Claire entered without Maddie. The room shifted at once. Graham's eyes moved over her plain black dress, her tired face, the temporary ring still on her finger. Miss Dawson, he said, how considerate of you to attend. Claire stopped beside the doorway. I live here, according to the paperwork you were so eager to share. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Brielle lowered her gaze to hide a smile. Evan turned fully toward Claire, and something in his face softened with relief and guilt at the same time. She did not walk to him. She stood alone. Graham noticed. Let us not waste time, he said, tapping the agreement. Evan manufactured a household to manipulate the terms of his father's will. He brought in a financially vulnerable woman and a child, presented them as family, and used them to block the legal sale of Whitaker House. Evan's voice was calm. I brought them here because the clause required evidence of stability. Graham smiled. Exactly. Fraud wearing a wedding ring. Margaret leaned forward. The agreement is legal. Both parties signed with counsel present. Legal is not the same as legitimate, Graham replied. The will speaks of family, not rental sentiment. Claire felt the words hit, but she kept her hand still. She had been called many things in the last 24 hours. Desperate, temporary, hired. But rental sentiment was new, and somehow it hurt less because Graham had finally revealed what frightened him. Not the contract. not scandal. Feeling. Evan stepped away from the mantel. Do not speak about her like that. I will speak about the facts, Graham said. You paid her housing, legal support, education funds for the child, and in exchange she performed devotion. The public understands that. The board understands that. And I suspect even Miss Dawson understands it, now that the child has asked the right question. Evan's control cracked at the edges. You used Maddie to win an argument. You used her first. The room went still. Claire saw Evan absorb the sentence like a man struck by something he could not entirely deny. That was the cruel genius of Graham. He wrapped lies around pieces of truth until even decent people doubted their own hands. Evan looked at Claire. I am sorry, he said, not to the room, not for strategy, but to her. Claire's throat tightened. Sorry does not tell Maddie why she feels bought. No, he said. It does not. Graham pushed the contract toward Evan. Then end this. Admit the arrangement was false. Allow the sale process to begin. Brielle has already agreed to support a public transition plan that preserves your position in the company. You may yet save your reputation. Brielle lifted her chin, as if she had been called to a noble duty. Evan, no one wants to punish you. We all understand grief can make a man reach for the wrong comfort. Claire almost laughed at that. Wrong comfort. As if she and Maddie had wandered in carrying blankets instead of wounds. Evan looked at Brielle, then at Graham, then at the papers on the table. The brass key to Whitaker House lay beside the contract, placed there by Graham like evidence that doors could be owned more easily than hearts. Evan picked up the agreement. Margaret stood quickly. Evan, be careful. Graham smiled. Yes, nephew. Be very careful. Evan looked at the signature lines. His name. Claire's name. 60 days. No romantic obligation. Public engagement only. Temporary residence. Every sentence that had brought Claire into the house, and every sentence that had failed to explain why he now woke before dawn hoping to hear Maddie's feet in the kitchen. He looked at Claire, and his voice dropped. This paper brought you here. Her eyes shone, but she did not move. Evan tore the contract once, straight down the middle. The sound cracked through the room. Then again, and again, until the pages lay in pieces across the polished table. Graham rose. Have you lost your mind? Evan placed the torn pieces beside the brass key. No, I believe I have finally found it. The board representatives stared. Brielle went pale. Margaret closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them with something like pride. Evan turned to Graham. This paper brought her here. It did not make her home. Claire's breath caught. The words were everything she had wanted to hear, and still not enough to erase what Maddie had heard that morning. Graham's face hardened. A touching performance. But without that arrangement, you have no evidence of a stable household. You have destroyed your own defense. Evan nodded. Then let the defense be the truth. I want Claire and Maddie here because the house is better with them in it. If that costs me Whitaker House, then perhaps I was never worthy of keeping it. Claire stared at him, stunned. For the first time, Evan was not bargaining. He was not buying safety. He was not choosing the house over the people inside it. But fear had taught Claire to distrust sudden beauty. She stepped forward slowly and removed the temporary ring from her finger. Evan's face changed. She placed it beside the torn contract. I believe you meant that, she said softly. But Maddie and I cannot be the lesson you learn only after the world finds out. Evan took 1 step toward her. Claire. She shook her head. If this is real, then it has to survive without a deal holding us in place. From upstairs, Maddie's small voice echoed through the hallway, calling for Claire. Claire turned toward the stairs. Evan watched her go, the torn contract scattered across the table between him and Graham. And for the first time, the richest man in the room understood that tearing up the paper had been easy. Convincing them they were free to stay would be the part that might break him. Claire Dawson waited until Whitaker House fell silent before she began packing, because leaving during the noise would have made it feel like an argument, and this was worse than an argument. This was a decision made in the quiet place where pride and heartbreak looked too much alike. Maddie slept curled on the guest room bed with Rabbit tucked under her chin, cheeks still blotchy from crying, one small hand resting on a drawing she had refused to tape back onto the refrigerator. The picture showed Whitaker House with yellow windows, but now she had drawn herself and Claire standing outside the gate. Claire stood beside the suitcase, holding that paper like it weighed more than all the clothes she owned. Downstairs, Evan had torn the contract to pieces in front of Graham, Brielle, the board, and every ghost that had ever kept that house cold. He had said the right words. He had looked at her like the house had finally learned how to ask. But Maddie had heard the wrong words first. Part of the deal. Bought. Arrangement. Those words had entered the child before Evan's apology could. Claire could forgive a wound placed on her own skin. She did not know how to ask Maddie to forgive one she should never have received. She folded the drawing carefully and placed it in Maddie's backpack. Then she removed the brass key from her pocket. The old metal was warm from her hand, the edges worn smooth by generations of Whitakers who had unlocked the same door without ever asking whether anyone felt welcome inside. Claire carried it downstairs alone. The kitchen was dark except for the small light above the stove. The refrigerator looked almost alive beneath Maddie's drawings. Crooked houses, rabbits, flowers, Evan as a tall rectangle, Mrs. Bell with enormous glasses, Claire with hair down to her knees. Claire stood in front of them for a long time. She wanted to leave them there. She wanted Evan to wake and see what staying had almost become. But Maddie had drawn them. Maddie had loved them. So Claire took them down one by one, pressing each page flat, careful not to tear the tape. With every empty patch of stainless steel, the kitchen became less theirs. Less warm, less brave. By the time she finished, the refrigerator looked expensive again. That hurt most. She placed the brass key on the kitchen island beside a folded note for Mrs. Bell, not for Evan, because if she wrote to Evan, she might write too much. She might write that she had heard him say he was home in the library. She might write that she had wanted, foolishly, dangerously, to believe him. She might write that she loved the version of him who learned marshmallows mattered, who let children correct him, who looked at a house full of money and finally saw how poor it had been. Instead, she wrote only 3 sentences. Thank you for making Maddie feel seen. Please tell Evan this is not punishment. A home has to choose us too. At dawn, Mrs. Bell found them at the side entrance, Claire with 2 bags, Maddie sleepy and silent in her yellow coat. The older woman's face crumpled before she could hide it. Miss Claire, she whispered. Claire hugged her quickly, because if she held on too long she would stay. Take care of him, she said. Mrs. Bell looked toward the staircase. He needs to learn how to take care of what he loves before it leaves. Claire swallowed. Maybe this is how he learns. They left in a hired car before Evan came downstairs. When he entered the kitchen 30 minutes later, he knew before anyone spoke. The house told him, not with sound, but with the absence of it. No Maddie explaining breakfast to Rabbit. No Claire opening curtains with unnecessary determination. No spoon against a mixing bowl. No smell of pancakes, butter, maple syrup, or the ordinary morning he had started to crave like forgiveness. Then he saw the refrigerator. Empty. The drawings were gone. Only faint tape marks remained. Small pale squares where warmth had been removed. Evan stood there in his white dress shirt, motionless, as if the whole house had stepped back from him. Mrs. Bell stood near the doorway, eyes red. They left before sunrise. Evan saw the brass key on the island. He picked it up slowly. The same key he had offered Claire as part of a deal. The same key he had mistaken for access when what he should have given her was choice. Beside it lay the note. He read it once. Then again. A home has to choose us too. Evan closed his hand around the key until the metal pressed into his palm. Where did they go? Mrs. Bell shook her head. She did not say. Graham called by 9. Evan did not answer. Brielle sent a message by 10, offering discreet support. Evan deleted it. Margaret Sloan arrived before noon with court updates, board pressure, and a cautious warning that Claire leaving could weaken his position. Evan listened without expression until she said, from a legal standpoint, her absence complicates the household stability claim. He looked at the empty refrigerator, then stopped building the claim around her. Margaret paused. Evan, secure Claire's guardianship support independently. No conditions. No publicity. No tie to me, the house, or the estate. That may not help you keep Whitaker House. I am aware. He set the key on the table. I should have made sure they were safe even if. They never came back. For the next 2 days, Evan searched without making it a spectacle. He went to Claire's old apartment in Jersey City, but the landlord said she had moved out after paying nothing because an anonymous legal fund had covered the arrears. Evan knew Margaret had obeyed. He went to Maddie's school, but the office would not give information, and for once Evan did not push. He left his card only with a note saying Claire owed him nothing. He visited the legal aid clinic where Claire had once waited for guardianship advice. No answer. He drove through neighborhoods in New Jersey where small rental houses sat behind chain-link fences and winter yards, looking for a yellow raincoat, a stuffed rabbit, a window with paper flowers. Each evening he returned to Whitaker House, and the emptiness met him at the door like Graham's final victory. On the third night, Evan found one drawing stuck behind the refrigerator, missed in Claire's careful leaving. It showed the kitchen table with 4 mugs of hot chocolate. Maddie had written in uneven letters, "Home is where nobody gets left outside." Evan sat on the kitchen floor with the drawing in his hands until morning light touched the windows. When his phone finally buzzed, it was from Mrs. Bell, who had gone to deliver coats to a church shelter in Montclair. Her message held an address and 6 words: "She is safe, but not happy." Evan stood, took the brass key from the island, gathered the forgotten drawing and the stack of papers Margaret had prepared for Maddie's guardianship, and walked out of Whitaker House without calling a driver, because this time he was not going to arrive like a billionaire solving a problem. He was going to arrive like a man asking permission to come home. Evan Whitaker found Claire Dawson in a small blue rental house on a quiet street in Montclair, New Jersey, where the lawns were still damp from morning frost, and every porch seemed to hold a life simple enough to hurt him. He parked at the curb instead of pulling into the driveway, because arriving at the door of someone you loved with too much certainty felt like another kind of trespass. The brass key was in his coat pocket. Maddie's forgotten drawing was folded carefully inside an envelope. The guardianship papers Margaret had prepared rested under his arm, signed, filed, and free of his name in every place that mattered. No conditions. No requirement to return. No quiet clause tying a child's safety to a billionaire's need to keep a house. Evan stood at the front gate for a long moment, looking at the small window where paper snowflakes had been taped crookedly to the glass. One of them was shaped like a rabbit. His chest tightened. Before he could knock, the door opened. Claire stood there in jeans, a cream sweater, and bare feet, her blonde hair tied back loosely, her face tired in the way people look when they have been strong for a child and lonely afterward. She saw him and did not smile. That hurt, but Evan accepted it. "How did you find us?" she asked. "Mrs. Bell found out you were safe. She did not tell me until she thought I understood what safe should mean." Claire's eyes moved to the papers under his arm, then to his coat pocket. "If you brought another document, I cannot do this." "I brought several," he said, "but none of them ask you for anything." He held out the folder. Claire did not take it. "What is it?" "Your guardianship support. Legal filings. Housing references. Education funds for Maddie, secured through an independent trust. No Whitaker House requirement. No engagement requirement. No connection to whether you ever speak to me again." The cold morning seemed to pause between them. Claire's expression shifted, but she guarded it quickly. "Why?" Evan swallowed. "Because I should have done it the night I met you. Because Maddie should have been safe before I ever asked you to help me. Because you were right. A home has to choose you too, and I never gave you the freedom to know whether it had." Claire looked down at the porch boards. For a moment, he could hear children laughing somewhere down the block, a dog barking, the ordinary world continuing, without caring that his entire life had narrowed to whether she would take one step closer or one step away. Then Maddie appeared behind Claire, wearing pajamas with stars on them, rabbit under one arm. She froze when she saw Evan. "Did you come to take us back to the big house?" she asked. Evan lowered himself until he was closer to her height, not kneeling for drama, not performing humility, simply refusing to tower over a child who had already been made afraid by adults standing above her. "No, Maddie. I came to bring you something you forgot." He took out the drawing and unfolded it carefully. "Home is where nobody gets left outside," he read softly. Maddie's lips parted. "You found it. Behind the refrigerator." "It fell." "I know." His voice grew rough. "I think I did too." Claire looked away, but not before he saw tears gather in her eyes. Evan reached into his coat pocket and removed the old brass key. He placed it on the porch rail between them instead of putting it in Claire's hand. "I am not asking you to save my house," he said. "I am not asking you to help me win against Graham. I am not asking you to finish a contract I should never have let define you. I am asking if, someday, you and Maddie could choose Whitaker House as home. And if the answer is no, I will still make sure both of you are safe." Claire stared at the key. The metal caught the pale morning light, no longer looking like access, no longer looking like a deal, but like a question waiting for an honest answer. "You tore up the agreement in front of them," she said quietly. Yes. But tearing it up did not tell Maddie she mattered before the house. Evan nodded. I know. It did not erase the article. I know. It did not make me stop feeling like I was hired before I was loved. His eyes closed briefly. I know. That was the answer that finally reached her. Not a defense. Not a polished apology. Not a promise dressed like a press statement. Just a man standing on a small porch with nothing to gain if she said no, letting the truth cost him something. Maddie stepped forward and picked up the key with both hands. If we go back, she said, looking at him seriously, can my pictures stay on the refrigerator? Evan's face softened in a way Claire had never seen in the ballroom, the boardroom, or even the library. They can cover the entire refrigerator. And can Rabbit have his own chair? Rabbit may select any chair that is not already occupied by a person or important paperwork. Maddie considered this. And if someone calls me part of a deal? Evan's eyes moved to Claire, then back to the child. Then I will say what I should have said the first time. You are not a deal. You are not a prop. You are Maddie Dawson. And any house lucky enough to hear your laugh should be grateful. Claire pressed her hand to her mouth. Maddie looked up at her aunt. Can we go home now? The word home broke something open in the quiet. Claire took the key from Maddie, felt its weight, and this time it did not feel like a debt. It felt like a choice. She looked at Evan. We come back slowly. As slowly as you need. No cameras. None. No using us to win your inheritance fight. Evan's voice was steady. If I lose the house, I lose it. I want you there only if being there feels like belonging. Claire looked toward the tiny rental behind her, then down the street where she had tried to build a new beginning out of safety and sorrow. Then she looked back at Evan, at the man who had finally arrived without power in his hands. Then we will come for dinner, she said. Not forever. Not yet. Evan's breath caught like it was the greatest mercy he had ever been given. Dinner is enough. Weeks later, Whitaker House reopened its front doors, not for a gala, not for investors, not for the family council Graham had tried to control, but for children who knew what it meant to lose a place to belong. Margaret proved Graham's leak had violated privacy protections, and his petition to sell the house collapsed under its own cruelty. Brielle disappeared from the story as quietly as she had tried to enter it. The grand dining room became a family support hall. The East Wing became temporary housing for guardians fighting to keep children with relatives. The old library held tutoring programs every Saturday, and Mrs. Bell made hot chocolate with more than 2 marshmallows because Maddie insisted it was policy. Claire did not move back in all at once. She left a sweater first. Then Maddie left Rabbit's backup blanket. Then, drawings returned to the refrigerator, one by one, until the stainless steel vanished beneath crooked houses, flowers, and a tall rectangle man who slowly learned how to smile. One evening, months later, Evan found Claire in the kitchen making pancakes shaped badly enough to concern professional standards. Maddie was at the island doing homework, Rabbit seated in a chair of honor. The brass key lay on the counter, no longer a symbol of a contract, just part of the room. Evan stood in the doorway, and Claire looked up. You are late. He smiled softly. I am home. Maddie did not look up from her worksheet. Then wash your hands. Pancakes are almost ready. Claire laughed, and the sound moved through Whitaker House like breath returning to lungs that had waited years to remember how. Evan crossed the kitchen, took Claire's hand, and kissed her knuckles with quiet reverence. Thank you for choosing this place. Claire looked around at the drawings, the flowers, the child, the warmth no contract could have created. Then she squeezed his hand. No, Evan. Thank you for finally letting it choose us back.